So I took a little break from doing my videos on figures, and I'm going to be returning to it. I've got a couple more figures that are going to be coming on the way, but I thought I would do something a little bit different for a brief time here, which is to talk about comic books, which was kind of my first big love of collecting was comic books long before I was collecting figures, and so I thought I would start with my all-time favorite writer, which is Alan Moore. This is going to be a very unscripted discussion here, and I'm going to try to keep it around 10 minutes and then probably just stop once I get to that point. Alan Moore isn't just my favorite comic book writer of all time. He is easily my favorite. And if I were to go through and list out my top five favorite stories, series, or whatever, all time in comics, Alan Moore would probably occupy all five of those spots. That's how much respect I have for what he's done. And my introduction to Alan Moore was with Swamp Thing. And so when Swamp Thing first came out, he inherited it. I think it was issue, I want to say 21, that he took over, and he was tasked with basically reinventing the character. So this was long before the internet. This would have been back in the 80s. So I probably learned about it through maybe some fanzines or something. But he came with a lot of hype at the time, about as much hype as you can whip up pre-internet. I knew he was coming over from Britain. And so I said, well, let me give it a try. Even though Swamp Thing really wasn't a character I was that interested in, I thought I'd give it a try. And I was absolutely blown away. And I have to admit, as somebody who collected comic books in the late 70s, early 80s, and then all the way up until today, there wasn't a lot of great writing back then. Alan Moore's writing was so much better than anything I had ever seen, which is, we're coming on the tail end of the comic book code, which unfortunately really kind of tied writers' hands in what they wanted to write. And I believe it was with Swamp Thing that DC finally got rid of the comic book codes because it was a voluntary process, and they just said to hell with it. And so Alan Moore was given a lot more flexibility. I don't believe he used profanity, and I don't remember any really gratuitous violence in there. There was definitely some hardcore stories, but they were just much more, much deeper stories. I think the characterization was much better than anything I had read before, and there were stories in there that stayed with me up until today. You know, this is the paperback versions of his entire run. So what's interesting is that it's one of the most acclaimed series ever for DC, and there's never been an omnibus. There's never been a deluxe edition. They finally did an absolute edition. I own two of them, and there is a third which I guess did come out, and I didn't get it. So these are the absolute editions. So I have the first two absolute editions. I had serious problems with these absolute editions because, as far as I'm concerned, Swamp Thing is a collaborative effort. It wasn't a one man job, and so it was basically Alan Moore working with Rick Veit or John Totalben, and why are they not? Oh, let's see. Okay, Stephen Bissette and John Totalben. Sorry. They really, you could see the complexity here in the drawings here. And so Bissette and Totalben really made a huge difference. But it wasn't just the two of them. So the colors were by Tatiana Wood. And for whatever reason, DC decided to completely redo the coloring for the absolute editions. Now, they will go in and clean up coloring. That's very common. But they decided to do something different this time. They decided to absolutely give the colorist, who was, I guess, an acclaimed colorist, carte blanche to do whatever he wanted. And he completely changed the coloring, and I don't think for the better. Added a lot more colors, and I didn't think that that helped because it's supposed to be a dark Gothic story. So I wrote a pretty harsh review of the story. And back when Amazon allowed for comments, I got a comment from the colorist. I actually got a comment from the colorist who was not happy with my review, but I did not rewrite my review. I did respond to him, and I said I got nothing against your coloring, or as a colorist, nothing against you as a colorist. I just didn't. I felt it was an insult to what Tatiana Wood did, and I didn't think it improved it. So it's a review, and that's my opinion on it. And so I mentioned that because if people are considering buying it, they should know that the coloring was completely redone. But getting back to Alan Moore, so this was, you can see up here, award-winning writer. He's won tons of awards, and I'm pretty sure that he won some awards for Swamp Thing when it was coming out. Basically, he was allowed to do whatever he wanted, which was he changed the character significantly, and pretty much started off by ending the idea that this was a man who was turned into a swamp creature. What Alan Moore decided to do was make it so that it was a swamp creature that thought he was a man. So, what is his name? Oh, I can't think of the guy's name who became Swamp Thing all of a sudden. Cable? No. Shoot, I can't remember it. But it was basically rewritten so that that man was dead. He was truly dead. Now, in previous stories, it was kind of his thing. Was he wanted to get back to being a human, and in at least one story in the original series, he was successful. So it kind of conflicted with what Alan Moore did, but that's fine. These things happen all the time. So the other thing that Alan Moore did was he changed it so that he gave Swamp Thing all sorts of new powers. Basically made him immortal, unkillable, far stronger. And then he created the Parliament of Trees and all sorts of things. And Swamp Thing was able to actually travel to different planets and all sorts of stuff. In my opinion, I think that the first two volumes are much better. I didn't realize until I read some of the introductions that a lot of the ideas that he had were pitched by other people. So he wasn't coming up with everything himself, but he was definitely coming up with the writing itself. And it's good to have a collaborative effort. But I think that over time I became less and less interested in this series. And then I just feel like Alan Moore kind of either he ran out of steam or he just wasn't writing what I wanted to read. It got a bit too esoteric. And I think I collected all the way through his entire run. But I kind of was losing interest. I definitely think that his earlier stuff, particularly with like the Monkey King, and some of those stories were absolutely amazing. And I didn't even realize at the time that the Monkey King actually was not created by Alan Moore, that he was from a different comic book from years earlier. And I did finally read that. And so, I like the way that Alan Moore is able to integrate in ideas from other people, but he definitely can take different ideas and produce something that is better than the sum of the parts. So this is about 10 minutes, and I'm going to cut it off. But I'm going to go through the various Alan Moore, my favorite storylines. Swamp Thing was the one that where I discovered him. Me personally, I mean, I didn't discover him, but this is where for me I was first experiencing his writing, and it remains, if not my favorite, definitely one of the most influential stories, comic book stories that I've ever read. Okay.